Hello and welcome to the Finance Quarter. I'm Andrew Robertson. It's a sad fact of life that when we die, the thoughts of the relatives we leave behind can sometimes turn to money, our money. It can and does often lead to an unholy brawl between family members as they fight over who's going to get what from your estate. So how can you stop your will being challenged and ensure that your assets actually go where you want them to go? Well, a man who has some answers is estate planning specialist Terry McCabe from McCabe Terrell Lawyers in Sydney. Terry, most people believe that when they prepare a will, that's the end of the matter and that their money and their other assets will go to the people that they want to. But it's not that simple, is it?
It's not, Andrew. The traditional view is the one that you've just expressed, and it was the view of the old common law judges in England, where they took the view that if you own something, you're entitled to leave it as you wished, and you could leave it to the outer Mongolian dog's home if you wanted, provided you're of sound mind. But that's no longer the case here in Australia, and their wills are subject to challenge, and there are probably two main areas where they're challenged. The first one is an allegation that at the time you made the will you didn't know what you were doing, you weren't of sound mind. And then the second area of challenge, a lot more common now, is where close family members say that you haven't provided for them as a wise and just testator would, and that is that you haven't given them adequate maintenance funds, education funds, funds for advancement in their life. And so therefore they take the view that they should be able to challenge your will and get a fairer provision from your estate.
From the way you're talking there, it sounds like it's a growing problem.
It is, Andrew. We've got the Supreme Court down the road there, and increasingly the judges are finding that the court lists are being filled with these cases that are brought under legislation called the Family Provision Legislation. It's part of the Succession Act, but it enables close family members such as wives, past wives, children, and de facto partners, same-sex partners, people who have been dependent on a deceased and live with a deceased. Those people are eligible persons to make an application to challenge the provisions of a will.
In your experience, what are the most common mistakes that people make that allow their will to be challenged?
Probably the most basic mistake is that at the time people are making a will, they don't think about all of the people who might have a claim on their bounty. The court requires them to act wisely and justly towards a range of basically close family members, and that's the people who I spoke about, and they need to consider those people at the time that they're making their will, and if possible show by another written document apart from the will called a memorandum of reasons that they have given this some thought and that they have considered the various needs and demands and competing claims of the people who might expect to receive something from their estate.
This written memorandum that you referred to, it's a way of giving the court some insight into your thinking. Is that how it works?
It is. That's right. Normally, of course, the testator won't be around when the will is challenged, and it's hard for the court to divine what he or she might have had in mind. But this memorandum of reasons enables that person to effectively stand there in the courtroom and say, well, look, I did give this some thought. I have considered what is appropriate for these people, and this is why I've done what I've done in my will.
So for people who are watching who might think that's a good idea, is it just a matter of writing a letter, or do you need to go to your solicitor, or how does it work?
It can be relatively informal, Andrew. A detailed letter would be very helpful, but a formal memorandum might, with a lawyer, might prompt some of the questions that should be considered. But an informal, detailed letter addressing the needs of people who might possibly challenge a will would be very useful, and that might never see the light of day unless a challenge is made. But if a challenge is made, it enables the testator to stand there in the courtroom and say, I have given this proper thought.
When a person does challenge a will, what sort of issues does the court consider?
The court looks at really the whole fact matrix that led to the challenge from the point of view of the person making the challenge. They look at what sort of relationship he or she had with the deceased, what sort of contact he had, whether or not the deceased made some provision for that person during his lifetime, what the size of his own personal assets are, whether he had any disability or problem that might give him lack of income down the track. From the estate's point of view, look at the size of the estate, and with a small estate you would expect that most of that estate would probably go to a widow, say, rather than a child, and then look at whether or not there are other competing claims and try and rank those claims to work out what a fair disposition of the assets might be.
Well, finally, what about issues such as superannuation, where you might need a binding nomination, or a business you might own, or assets you might have in a trust? How should you deal with them?
It's a good question, Andrew, because people also assume that their will deal with that and will cover those assets. It's important to know that the assets in a trust, a company, a super fund are not necessarily assets of the estate. With superannuation, it's important to do a binding death benefit nomination and to renew that every 3 years so that the people who you want to receive the super will receive it. With funds in a trust, particularly if a trust is controlled by a company, make sure that you appoint through your will people who will manage that trustee company in an appropriate way, and also do a detailed memorandum of wishes in relation to the trust, which sets out how you would like those assets to be dealt with.
A lot to do there. It's almost better to stay alive forever.
I think so. But unfortunately, none of us have yet discovered how to do that, and even lawyers have to meet their maker one day, Andrew, so none of us has that luxury.
Terry McCabe, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
The kangaroo and the emu are two of the best-known symbols of Australia, and of course they both feature on our coat of arms. They're also becoming an increasingly popular delicacy. And as the ABC's Nicole Chettle has discovered, exporters are hoping to take the kangaroo and the emu one step further and turn them into a money-spinning dietary supplements.
It's Skippy as you've never known her. The bush kangaroo's long since made the leap from paddock to plate. Now Kangaroo Essence is being marketed as a health supplement for men.
Kangaroo actually has a high concentration of protein and also high concentration of zinc, which are both very good for the male energy and stamina.
The kangaroo's given this business a jump start in Asia. Overseas sales for this and other products have doubled every year for the last 3 years, fuelled by strong demand in China. Its revenue's on track to top $10 million next year.
People perceive Australia as a healthy country, so that's the image we're taking to the Asia market.
Australia's clean, green image is resonating with Asia's exploding middle class. But with the sturdy Aussie dollar, the Institute of Exports says the key is finding a niche with a premium price point.
A niche market in a market that's got 50 or 100 million people is a big market. And I think if you can get a small share, or a relatively small share of some of those markets, it could be very lucrative.
Persistence is paying off for the Adelaide-based Emu Tracks, signing a deal that'll boost their bottom line tenfold. The emu industry is worth $12 million locally, but for some, exports are taking off.
We'll be rolling out over the course of 3 to 4 years to pretty much all the countries throughout Europe.
From the outback to Asia and beyond, some unique wildlife is waving the flag for local business. Nicole Chettle, ABC News.
Well, while the kangaroo and the emu are living symbols of Australia, the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge are two of the most popular man-made symbols of our country. They're a magnet for tourists, which is why Oprah Winfrey used them as a backdrop in her recent visit to Australia. Unfortunately, though, tourism numbers are well down, hit hard by the high value of the Australian dollar. But at least one industry veteran believes tourism operators shouldn't feel sorry for themselves, but should instead use the downturn to plan for a rosy future.
Dollars fluctuate. Currently our dollar's very high, and it's very hard for the poor struggling operators to attract people from overseas. Importantly, it's hard to keep Australians at home who are taking that Aussie dollar and off to Fiji and Bali and to Disneyland and spending with Gay Abandon. That cycle will turn again. In the meantime, we've got to make sure our quality is better. We've got to focus on our product, refurbishing the product when there's less demand, so that when it does swing around, when we get back in the marketplace, there's going to be a wonderful new shiny product there to attract the rest of the world to come and the rest of Australians to stay at home.
Well, speaking of tourism, a ship that's tied up here at Sydney's Circular Quay many times is the Queen Elizabeth II. But it's another QE2 which is in the news at the moment. It's called quantitative easing, and it's an attempt by the US Central Bank to kickstart the world's biggest economy. But what is QE2? CommSec Chief Economist Craig James explains.
Well, it's effectively stimulating the economy without having to touch interest rates. And it's employed basically because interest rates are already so low that they can't go any lower. So how does it work? Well, the central bank is effectively buying government securities and other bonds from financial institutions, and in exchange what they're getting is money. Now, they're not getting physical money. Basically, their accounts are getting credited with the amount. And that's why quantitative easing has been described as printing money. Well, it's not actually printing money. It's effectively money getting into the system through electronic means rather than physical cash. So will it work? Essentially, we'll never know. We can't isolate the influence. Other things have been happening at the same time. What we do know over recent months is that conditions have improved. Stability in financial markets, people getting on with life, investing in the share market again, and share markets have been rising. And certainly we are seeing economic recovery right the way across the globe.
Well, whatever the merits of QE2, the US Federal Reserve is clearly hoping it will bring the world's biggest economy back to life. That's it for another edition of the Finance Quarter. If you'd like to see any part of the program again, you can find us on the ABC News website. Just go to the business page and click on the Finance Quarter icon. And if you'd like to write to us about anything to do with money or business, our email address is thefinancequarter@your.abc.net.au. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Finance Quarter.